Kato lived in a small fishing village nestled along the banks of a vast and mysterious river. The village had thrived for generations, relying on the river's waters for food, trade, and survival. But recent times had been cruel. The fish had grown scarce, and famine loomed over the people. Each day, Kato set out in his small wooden boat, hoping to bring back enough to feed his wife and 2 young children. Yet, more often than not, he returned with empty nets and a heavy heart. The elders of the village often spoke in hushed voices about the spirits of the river. They told tales of beings that lurked beneath the surface, watching, waiting, punishing those who disrespected the water. Kato had grown up listening to these stories, but he had never believed them. To him, the river was just water, vast and indifferent, neither merciful nor cruel. It was simply a force of nature, and he believed hard work, not superstition, was the key to survival. One evening, as dark clouds gathered on the horizon, Kato decided to venture out once more. The sky was an eerie shade of purple, the air thick with the scent of rain. The villagers whispered warnings, urging him to stay back, but desperation drove him forward. He pushed his boat into the river, rowing against the gentle current, his thoughts filled with the worried faces of his children. As he cast his net into the water, the wind picked up, howling through the trees. The first raindrops splattered against the wooden boat. He knew he had little time before the storm arrived, but something made him pause. A sound, faint yet distinct, drifted across the water. It was a melody, soft and sorrowful, unlike anything he had ever heard. It seemed to come from the depths of the river itself, echoing between the waves. His skin prickled. Straining his eyes against the dim light, he searched the water. The song grew louder, wrapping around him like an invisible current. It was beautiful, yet there was something unsettling about it, something that made his heart pound. Then, through the mist rising from the river, he saw movement. A figure floated just beneath the surface, barely visible in the shifting waters. His breath caught in his throat. Was it debris, a lost traveler, or was it something else entirely? The elder's warnings rang in his mind, but he shook them off. He could not let someone drown. Without hesitation, he reached into the cold water, his hands grasping for the figure. The moment his fingers brushed against the skin, a shiver ran through him. It was ice cold, yet undeniably alive. With all his strength, he pulled the figure onto his boat. The storm roared above him, rain lashing against his face. He barely noticed. His eyes were fixed on the woman before him, her wet hair clinging to her face, her golden eyes slowly fluttering open. Kato had saved her from the river. But in that moment, he had no idea what he had just brought into his world. Kato stared at the woman he had just pulled from the river, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. Her body lay limp at the bottom of his small wooden boat, drenched and unmoving. The dim moonlight cast an eerie glow over her delicate features, smooth, dark skin glistening with water, long black hair tangled like river vines, and eyes that, even when closed, seemed to hold a strange power. But it was not her beauty that unsettled him. It was the unnatural chill of her body, colder than the river itself, as though she had been submerged for far longer than possible. The storm raged on, but Kato barely noticed the rain soaking his clothes or the wind rocking his boat. He placed a trembling hand near the woman's lips, expecting stillness. Instead, a faint breath brushed against his skin. His heart pounded. She was alive. He should have been relieved, but a deep unease crept through him. How had she survived in the river's merciless currents? Why had she been floating lifelessly, only to suddenly breathe again? The village elder's words echoed in his mind, stories of spirits, creatures that lurked beneath the waters, disguising themselves in human form. He shook the thought away. She was just a woman, a lost traveler, perhaps a victim of an accident. As he reached the shore, Cato lifted the woman into his arms. She was unexpectedly light, her wet clothes clinging to her slender frame. The weight of her unnatural coldness pressed against his skin, but he ignored it, focusing instead on getting her to safety. His hut was a modest structure, built from wood and dried reeds, with a fire pit in the center. He laid the woman down on a woven mat near the fire, stoking the embers until warm flames flickered to life. He had seen near drownings before, cold water stealing the warmth from the body, but this was different. No human should be this cold and still be breathing. As he worked to dry her, she stirred. A soft gasp escaped her lips, and her fingers twitched against the mat. Then, slowly, her eyes fluttered open. Cato froze. Her irises were a deep, unnatural gold, like sunlight reflecting off water. They flickered with an unearthly glow, and for a moment, Cato forgot how to breathe. He had never seen eyes like that before, not on any human. She tried to sit up, but her body trembled with weakness. Cato reached for a clay cup of water and pressed it into her hands. She stared at it for a moment, confused, before bringing it to her lips. Her movements were slow, almost uncertain, as if she were learning how to do something simple for the first time. "Who are you?" Cato asked cautiously. The woman parted her lips as if to answer, but the words that came out were strange, ancient, a dialect he had never heard before, though it carried the melody of something old and powerful. The sound of it sent a shiver down his spine. She frowned, struggling as if trying to grasp his language. After a long silence, she spoke again, this time in a broken, hesitant voice. "I do not know." Her voice was soft yet oddly resonant, as if it carried an echo of the river itself. Cato studied her, uncertainty gnawing at his thoughts. A woman who had been lost in the river, a woman who did not remember who she was, who spoke in a language that did not belong to their land. There was something unnatural about her, something that made the firelight flicker strangely against her skin. Still, he could not abandon her. He told himself she was just a traveler, someone in need of help. He had no idea that by saving her, he had brought something far beyond human into his home. Cato watched as Nia moved through the village, her presence both mesmerizing and unsettling. It had been only a few days since he had pulled her from the river, yet she had adapted quickly, blending in with the daily rhythms of life. She smiled at the children, helped the women weave baskets, and even sat among the elders when they told their evening stories. At first, the villagers had been fascinated by her, but soon, quiet murmurs began to spread. She was different. The first thing they noticed was that she never ate. While the rest of the village gathered around the communal fires for meals, Nia would sit silently, watching but never touching food. When offered a plate, she would simply shake her head and smile, as if the very idea of eating did not apply to her. Then there was her presence near the water. Cato had expected her to avoid the river after nearly drowning, but instead, she was drawn to it. He often found her standing at the shore, staring at the currents, as if listening to something only she could hear. When she walked away, her feet, though soaked, never left wet footprints in the sand. The women whispered that she was a spirit, a being that did not belong to the world of men. Despite their unease, the village had begun to prosper in ways that no one could explain. The famine that had plagued them for months seemed to vanish overnight. Fish, which had once been scarce, now filled the river in abundance. The fishermen barely needed to cast their nets before they were heavy with the largest catches they had seen in years. The river, once a place of uncertainty, had suddenly become a source of overwhelming fortune. And then there were the children. They adored Nia. Wherever she went, they followed, clinging to her hands, laughing in her presence. She sang to them in her strange, ancient dialect, and though none of them understood the words, they listened with wide, unblinking eyes. When they were near her, they never cried, never fought. Parents marveled at the peace she brought, but the elders watched with wary eyes. It was the chief's wife, an old woman named Mama Wata, who finally spoke aloud what others had feared. She is not one of us. She stood before Cato as he repaired his fishing nets, her voice firm and unshaken. I have lived long enough to know when something unnatural walks among us. That girl is not human. Cato barely looked up. She is just a lost traveller. Mama Wata shook her head. Travellers eat, Cato. Travellers sleep. Travellers leave footprints in the sand. She lowered her voice. Have you not wondered why the river suddenly gives so much? Why the fish returned the moment she arrived? The river spirits do not give freely. They always take something in return. Cato clenched his jaw. He had heard the whispers, seen the way the villagers watched Nia with both awe and fear, but he refused to believe she was a danger. She has done nothing but bring peace, he argued. The famine is over. The children love her, and yet you speak of her as if she is a curse. Mama Wata sighed. Cato, there are things in this world older than you and me, things that do not belong among us. You may have saved her from the river, but that does not mean she was meant to be saved. He met her gaze defiantly. I will not turn my back on her. The old woman studied him for a long moment, then shook her head. You are kind, Cato, but kindness can be dangerous when it blinds you. With that, she turned and walked away, leaving him alone with the weight of her warning. Yet even then, Cato refused to listen. He had brought Nia into his home, into his life. Whatever she was, whatever secrets she held, he was determined to stand by her, even if it meant ignoring the creeping sense of unease growing in his heart. Cato had always loved the river. It was the heart of their village, the giver of life, the provider of food. But in recent days, it had begun to feel different, alive in a way that unsettled him. It started with the whispers. At first, the fisherman thought it was the wind, but soon, too many had heard it for it to be ignored. Low, melodic voices hummed just above the water's surface at night, carrying eerie songs that made the skin crawl. Some claimed they heard their names being called. Others said the whispers promised things: fortune, love, power, if only they would step closer. But no one did. The elders grew anxious. Mama Wata, more than anyone, watched the river with deep suspicion. She had warned Cato, and now she warned the others. Something stirs in the water. We must not be fooled by its gifts. Still, Cato tried to ignore their fear. The river had always been mysterious, and the stories about spirits and voices were nothing new. Superstition was a dangerous thing. It made people see demons where there were none. Yet, in the privacy of his own mind, he could not deny that something was wrong. Nia had changed. She still smiled, still played with the children, still moved among the villagers like a ghost of silk and water. But her eyes, those golden, endless eyes, had become distant. Sometimes, Cato would catch her staring at the river for hours, unmoving, unblinking. She would tilt her head, as if listening to something just beyond his hearing, and her lips would move in silent speech. One evening, Cato worked late repairing his nets while the village settled into sleep. The night was thick with humidity, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth. He was just about to put away his tools when he saw her. Nia. She stood at the river's edge, her white garments flowing around her as if underwater. The moon hung low, bathing everything in silver. Cato was about to call out to her when she stepped forward, into the river. But she did not sink. The water parted around her like a living thing, curling and swirling at her ankles, but never rising. She moved deeper, the river cradling her instead of swallowing her. And then she began to glow. A faint, ethereal light pulsed from her skin, illuminating the darkness like a second moon. The golden hue shimmered across the water, and in that moment she looked less like a woman and more like something ancient, something that did not belong to the world of men. Kato felt his heart pound against his ribs. His feet moved before his mind could catch up, and he rushed toward the riverbank. Nia! She didn't react. He stepped into the water, reaching for her. Nia, come back! Finally, she turned. Her golden eyes locked onto his, and for the first time since he had found her, she looked sad. I do not belong here, she whispered. Her voice was soft, barely audible over the lapping of the waves, but it struck him harder than a storm. Kato swallowed. What are you? She hesitated, looking down at her hands, glowing, flickering with otherworldly light. When she lifted her gaze back to him, there was something ancient in her expression. You should not have saved me, she murmured. A chill spread through Kato's veins, the whispers in the water, the sudden return of the fish, the footprints she never left behind. He had been blind. Naya turned back to the river, her posture tense, her breath uneven. They are calling me, she said, and for the first time her voice held fear. Kato clenched his fists. Who? Naya closed her eyes. The ones I belong to. The village gathered under the great baobab tree as the shaman, old and wise, prepared his ritual. Smoke curled from a small fire, carrying the scent of burning herbs into the night air. The villagers stood in a tight circle, their faces tense, their whispers hushed. They had seen the signs, whispers in the water, shadows that moved beneath the surface, Nia's unnatural presence. Now, they needed answers. Kato held Nia's wrist tightly, unwilling to let her stand alone. She did not resist, but her golden eyes held a sadness he could not understand. The shaman lifted his arms, his voice deep and commanding. We call upon the spirits of the river. Show us the truth that hides in the depths. The fire roared, its flames shifting to an eerie blue. The villagers gasped, stepping back in fear, but the shaman remained firm, his chants growing louder. Then, the wind stopped. Everything, every sound, every movement, froze. Even the river, which never ceased its flow, stood still as if holding its breath. Then came the voice. It did not belong to any man. It was deep, ancient, and filled with power. It echoed through the village, rattling bones and sending chills into the hearts of those who heard it. She is not one of you. Naya flinched. The golden glow beneath her skin pulsed, as if something inside her had been awakened. The villagers murmured in fear. The shaman stepped forward, his gaze locking onto Naya. Who are you? He demanded. Naya lowered her head. I am Mami Wata, she whispered. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The elders exchanged terrified glances, their worst fears confirmed. The shaman's voice was grave. A spirit of the river. Naya lifted her eyes, shimmering with sorrow. I was once like them, she gestured toward the dark waters. But I broke the laws of my kind. I chose love over duty, and for that I was cast out, cursed to walk among humans until the river calls me back. Kato tightened his grip on her hand. Number, you're here now. You live with us. That should be enough. Nia turned to him, her golden eyes pleading. You don't understand. If I do not return, the water gods will come for me, and they will not come gently. A low rumble shook the ground. The villagers screamed as the sky above them darkened unnaturally. Thick storm clouds swirled into existence, covering the moon in shadows. A powerful wind swept through the village, toppling baskets and sending embers flying from the fire. And then the river moved. The stillness shattered as the water surged forward, spilling over the banks with a force that sent villagers running. It did not move like a normal flood. It slithered, unnatural and alive, as if responding to an unseen command. The whispers returned, but this time they were not gentle. They were angry, insistent, and growing louder. The shaman turned to Kato. She must go back. Kato's heart pounded. He looked at Nia, his mind screaming for a way to stop this. There has to be another way. Nia shook her head. The water gods had come. Cato stood at the river's edge, the weight of the village's survival pressing down on his chest. The water churned violently, rising higher with every second, swallowing the land that had sustained them for generations. The villagers cried out, scrambling for higher ground, their fear feeding the storm that raged above them. The elders, once patient and wise, now stood firm in their verdict. "She cannot stay!" The chief's voice boomed over the roaring wind. "The gods demand her return, or we will all perish!" Cato turned to Naya, his heart hammering. There has to be another way. Naya's golden eyes shimmered with sadness. "I have already stayed too long." Tears burned in Cato's eyes, but he could not argue. He had ignored the warnings, convinced that love could defy fate. Now, the river itself had risen to remind him otherwise. Hand in hand, he led her to the water, their steps slow, heavy. The moment her feet touched the waves, something shifted. The river stilled, its fury momentarily subdued. Nya took a deep breath, closing her eyes as if feeling an old familiar embrace. Then, before Cato's eyes, the transformation began. Her legs shimmered, dissolving into the silver-blue scales of a tail that flicked once, sending ripples across the water's surface. Her skin gleamed like moonlight on the ocean, and her hair, dark and flowing, moved with the tide as though part of the river itself. She was not human. She never had been. Cato reached out as if to hold her one last time, but she was already slipping away. Nia looked back, her voice barely above the whisper of the waves. "Thank you for showing me kindness, Cato. But I was never meant for land." With a final flick of her tail, she disappeared beneath the surface. The river, once violent and unforgiving, calmed instantly. The rising floodwaters receded, flowing back to their rightful place, as if appeased by her return. The storm clouds above scattered, revealing a silver moon that cast its pale light over the village. The danger had passed, but Cato felt no victory. He stood at the edge of the water, staring at the spot where she had vanished. His heart, though still beating, felt hollow. She was gone. The village had been saved, but he had lost something no man was meant to keep. And the river, now peaceful and serene, whispered a song only he could hear. Children sit around the village fires, wide-eyed as the elders whisper the tale of the fisherman and the water spirit. Their voices are hushed, reverent, as if speaking too loudly might wake something sleeping beneath the waves. They say Cato never loved another, that he spent his days fishing but never strayed too far from the river's edge. On nights when the moon was full, he would stand by the water, listening, waiting. Some claim they have seen him speaking to the river, as if answering an unseen voice. Others swear that on certain nights, when the wind is still, the water sings. The same haunting melody that lured Cato to Naya so long ago. No one dares fish during those nights. Fishermen who stay out too late report seeing a shimmering figure beneath the surface, golden eyes glowing in the dark currents. The village shaman warns them not to stare too long, lest the river claim them too. Years pass, and Cato grows old, but his heart remains in the water. One morning, his boat is found drifting near the shore, empty. No footprints lead away, no sign of struggle, only silence. The villagers do not search for him. They already know the river has taken him, and now, when the full moon rises, two voices sing from the depths.